Welcome to Adapting, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is...
Bad.
And KJ.
Today, we'll be discussing Stray Dog from 1949 and its inspiration, The Naked City, from 1948. Screenwriter Marvin Wald and producer Mark Hellinger put together the film The Naked City from a number of sources and inspirations, including the Italian neorealist project, John Dos Passos's The USA trilogy, and the actual policing process by which crimes are solved, a process writer Wald felt was not captured in Private Eye pictures. He saw those movies as sort of missing what the police do. According to Wald, the daily work of police involves interrogation, not muscle or genius, but long days of walking, long roads, and asking the right questions. This movie then marks the beginning of the police procedural, a genre that remains popular even today. When moving over to Stray Dog, we are seeing the real beginning of what becomes known as the Japanese noir and later the Japanese New Wave movement. As Imogen Sarah Smith, a film scholar, said of the noir genre, quote, "Noir is the plant that springs up after the fire." That plant springs up in Japan after the Second World War. And here, this style is well suited to the times. It touches on anxiety, dread, fatalism, but in Japanese noir, this style is played more to discuss group dynamics in society and not necessarily kind of Freudian subconscious stuff writ large in the city. We're looking at the diseases of society and the workings of groups more so. They're also deeply interested in the effect of America on that society, even though that doesn't seem to play too much a role in Stray Dog. In 1960, the U.S.-Japan Treaty was revised, allowing America to continue to man military bases in Japan. This sparked something of a student movement in which Japanese youth protested this proposal. This event seemed to be the political moment of the time, and that seemed to spark the youth culture in Japan. Meanwhile, Shokaku Studios, which had been turning out movies with traditional Japanese depictions and themes, discovered they were being outpaced by Nikatsu Studios, the makers of many films in this noir gangster crime tradition. Consequently, Shokitu turned over their filmmaking duties to young and unknown assistant directors, who took over and created the Japanese New Wave, riding on the youth protest culture that had emerged in response to these new times. And so we have many filmmakers that made movies in this vein. We see Pigs and Battleships, a noir from 1961, The Cruel Story of Youth from 1960, Woman in the Dunes from 1964. And you also see a lot of crime and other type of noir coming out of this. And there seems to be this kind of crossover between the noir of the late 1940s and 1950s, and then this kind of new wave stuff that begins to happen in the late 1950s and 1960s. That all being said, by way of introduction, I want to start with The Naked City. I think this is the first police procedural we've done, and I want to ask, what about that genre is different or adds to this conversation we've been having these last 9 weeks, has it been?
Yeah, it's been 9 weeks.
About that, thank you. Yeah, I thought this movie was interesting. The Naked City. It opens. I thought it was kind of weird how it opens. It opens with, and apparently this was inspired by the USA trilogy, the John Dos Passos books. This kind of like news clipping collection, which is how he writes the book. He puts a bunch of like news clippings together alongside narrative. And that apparently was their inspiration, as well as there was actually a woman who was murdered by a sort of high society person, or suspected of of being of high society, or the person they suspected was of high society. It wasn't suspected he was or was not of high society. But anyway, that seemed to be like a big inspiration, as well as this idea. Apparently, the writer had spent a lot of time with cops, and he was just like, this stuff with Humphrey Bogart is stupid. No one solves crimes this way. It's not it's not really brain work and it's not muscle work. It's basically these people walk around all day
It's
and ask
fantasy. Well, I mean,
questions.
the
Hmm.
Humphrey Bogart stuff is fantasy. I mean,
Hmm.
that's sort of its appeal to some extent. But yeah,
Yeah, and he saw himself as inventing, this writer saw himself as inventing the police procedural, which I took his word at it. I don't know if that's exactly true, but his idea of the police procedural was somehow this was going to, um, if Chandler was going to bring crime back to the criminals and make a kind of more realistic idea of crime, then the Naked City was going to make the most realistic depiction of crime, right? That crime is something that isn't solved by these kind of brilliant private eyes. It's solved by cops who basically just labor all the time until the damn thing's done. And it's also solved, another thing he wanted to point out, it's solved by committee. It's not an individual act, it's a group of people who have to solve these things and be on it. And those are kind of factors that are introduced in the Naked City that I think are unique to our show up to this point. I don't think we've seen really crime solved by committee. This is the first time we're moving past sort of individual agency, which I think is a real interesting factor.
I would agree. I mean, it's definitely the first one. I don't know if it's the first police procedural, but it's certainly the first one we've done, and I don't think there are many before that. And even Chandler, I mean, I would give him a little more credit than that. I mean, it is fantasy in the sense that they're obviously, it's like all the, they're too over the top, the lady in the lake and the woman here, and they switch bodies and they do this. There's always, as much as he sort of makes fun of the tropical fish poison of Agatha Christie, he's kind of doing that to some extent. But this one is pretty mundane. The murders are in Naked City and in Stray Dog. It's in Naked City, it's a just a bunch of people trying to fence stolen jewelry, and in Stray Dog, it's a dude who wants to impress a girl. There's no sort of fancy thing here. There's no psychosis. There's no gambling ships off the coast. There's none of that stuff. It's pretty straightforward in terms of what they're doing. So this is certainly more sort of just a regular crime, and yeah, you're just watching the people just go the beat. And I think both movies make very obvious that they both have scenes of just drudgery, of just people going from store to store to store to store asking, have you seen this man? Have you seen this man? Have you seen this man? Until you find someone who has. And that probably is, especially then, pretty comparable. There was no facial recognition. There was no, even when they're going to go and try to look up crimes, they have to go through stacks and stacks of paper to find it. So I'm sure it's much more realistic. I did enjoy it. I think especially there's a couple things I liked about it, especially I like both of them actually a lot. Naked City I liked because it made me very nostalgic to go back to New York City. A bunch of those spots I recognized. I lived on one of the subway stations that they show. They have like one of the shots from the subway station. They show the subway coming, like rising up from the Queensboro Bridge in the background. I'm like, I saw that every morning for like 5 years. So it definitely made me very nostalgic for that period. And they even show the guy riding on the 7 train out to Jackson Heights, and I used to take the 7 train out to Woodside. And that's the most impressive thing I think about that movie. It is stunning how well it evokes New York City, and I think it is true because they claim, at least in the beginning, that they film a lot of it on site, and it shows. It really does feel very much like New York City, even from 80 years ago. It still has that feeling of New York City. The other thing, though, I really liked about it, about both of them, and I'm kind of developing this theory for myself. I'm gonna, try to think about this more, but is this idea that like the earlier you go into a genre's and sort of the earlier you go into the sort of genre's genesis, the sort of more pure the storytelling becomes to some extent. So this one it's a police procedural, and it's police procedurals are probably the most familiar television genre of the last 30 years. They are everywhere, everywhere. Thinking of Law and Order being the primary ones, and Law and Order SVU, and these kind of things. But you watch like a Law and Order, you watch Law and Order SVU. In the earlier seasons, they tend to be much more straightforward. They tend to follow this formula more. But as you get further and further and further into those seasons, and they just keep going and going and going and going, they almost become sort of adulterated, and they have to kind of keep adding more and more drama. And so it becomes so much more about the characters are fun, Stray Dog especially. Stray Dog has better characters than Naked City, but the characters are fun, but that's not really what I'm not there to hear about their gambling addictions or their their children are there to make me feel bad when they get shot. They are not there because I actually care about hearing about their children. Law and Order, they seem to have forgotten that, and so they just constantly do that, and they get so much more dramatic. They feel the crime has to get more bigger and more absurd as they go on. And I like these earlier versions of these stories because you kind of get to see them just in their pure form. You get to see them when they were just telling this specific type of story, and they're often really good at telling that particular story. I think this is true of a lot of genres. The more I'm kind of thinking about it and going backwards, you can find that. And as you get further and further along, people feel the need to be sort of original and they feel the need to sort of change things. And sometimes it works, but 99 times out of 100, they just botch it and they turn them into these sort of monstrosities. So I liked going back and seeing a police procedural from in the really early days, which I had never seen before, and just seeing how fun it can be to watch a man walk around the street showing a photo and asking if anyone's seen him. Law and Order would never do that. They would show it very briefly, and but then Ice-T would go and slam someone's head into a bar and be like, "You saw him!" They would amp the drama up like immediately. This one spends 5 minutes showing him wander, or in Stray Dog, he spends 5-10 minutes of the movie just wandering around pretending that he needs to have a gun. And it's great. It works really well. They wouldn't do that now because that sort of just becomes shorthanded. We're familiar enough with that trope that we just skip it. But it feels fresh here. It feels unique. It feels original. And that's why I really liked going back to these early ones because it awakens the whole genre when you get to see it in its infancy.
It's also interesting to see what didn't survive into TV. In The Naked City, there at least two times I can remember, loonies come into the police station or they interview a loony that just start, yeah, no, I saw him and da, 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 like,
Yes.
and they don't seem to do that a lot
Which
modern
is
time,
great.
right? Like that was
Yeah,
something
which is
that
great.
didn't yeah, no, it was a breath of fresh air in one of these movies, but that was interesting to see things that didn't survive into Law and Order and NCIS. I don't know, pick one of these.
Mhm. Yeah, it seems as if I think both of these are especially interested in how a police officer deals with every aspect of their job. And that's more so the Naked City. And so part of that is loonies are going to come in and you kind of have to be polite to the loony until they leave and then you move on with your day. They seem to be trying to, uh, Jules Dassin was the director, he seems to be trying to catalog this experience. And over time, it just becomes, oh, we're interested in this as a vehicle for telling a crime story or holding up a mystery. In this, the mystery isn't even that interesting. When you meet the guy at the end, he's not some character you met before. It's not a surprise that
Neither
this
mystery
guy
is
did.
interesting.
Yeah,
Neither mystery is interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Why would you don't care about the other dude? You don't even, I mean, it's not a question of who he is, it's where he is.
Hmm.
No one
Yeah.
really cares. You never even find out anything really about the dude. No one cares who he is. And in the first one, you see him in the first 2 minutes.
Hmm. Yeah, you see him running out the window, right? At the beginning. And he says, like,
Yeah.
we're going to do this right. Yeah. But it doesn't matter. What matters is these men doing a job. And both of them, and I think this is maybe something that has to get trimmed out. It doesn't have to get, but it does get trimmed out when you turn it into a television show that has to be repeated 22 times a year for 30 or 60 minutes. The sort of social elements have to get cut. And I think both Dusan and Kurosawa are interested in the social elements. What's interesting is in Naked City, those social elements are they're really sort of fun. They're not dire. Like the loony isn't dire. It's just kind of funny. And then you also have those like girls in the subway and who look at the dress who are sort of just commenting on the city. We hear their internal monologue as they're commenting on the city, and it's kind of funny and cute. It doesn't add to anything really other than the atmosphere. It doesn't add to the plot, is what I mean. But it adds to the atmosphere. And you have that kind of newsreel guy who's, there to just tell you that there's 8 million stories in the city, and this was one of them. That type of thing.
That
Um,
was also really weird how much they leaned on that dude. It felt like an Ed Wood movie. Like it just had this like very long. I'm like, he is just talking and talking and talking.
Yeah, I know. It was like when I watched that sequence, and I think that's when I texted you guys, like, this is kind of bonkers because you just like I didn't know what this movie was about. It just seems to be a summary of people's days or something like that. Like you get up, there's some babies who are 7 o'clock babies, and some babies who are 8 o'clock babies. But this baby is a 6 o'clock baby. That type of thing. Um, but
I thought the same thing. I'm like, oh man, they're just gonna keep going. And then I'm like, and then but they do a good job of them being like, and some people's lives are ending. And I'm like, oh, they're murdering that lady. Like, oh, she's struggling. And that was a like, oh well, now the drama started. Okay, I got it now. But yeah, I didn't know. I mean, the only reason I knew it was a mystery story is because, that's what we're doing. But if I didn't, I don't know. I would love to know how much people knew about what movies were about when they went into them in like 1949 or 1948 when this movie came out. Because I don't think most people probably only knew what it was from the posters, I assume. So they probably went into it wondering what this was, and then they saw this beginning and thought, "Oh God, what is this?" And then they sort of get oh, okay, no, now it's got interesting.
Mm.
Um, but it was weird. The voiceover was weird.
Yeah, his argument, the writer's argument was he wanted to put the narrative in context of a newsreel. So he sort of wanted to have sort of ripped from the headlines type of feel, which obviously that that lived on to Law and Order. But that's what he wanted. He wanted to have it appear like this was part of the sounds of the city,
Well, I
right?
just realized that probably makes more sense because they would have had newsreels at the beginning of the movies. You would have gone to the movie and seen your cartoon. You would have seen your Looney Tunes cartoons, and then you would have had your newsreel. So this would have felt like another newsreel at the beginning. That actually makes more sense. I had never even considered that. But I imagine that's what he's playing. I assume that's what he's playing off of, right?
Yeah, that's what the writer had said, and he was
That makes
inspired.
a lot more sense. I kind of get that now because we don't have that anymore.
No.
um it would be like it started, although this would be just hackneyed now, but if someone started a movie as if it was like the Channel 7 news, and it was, next up at the news at 6, and then they had that sort of thing, and it sort of felt like it really was a news story, then that might work. Then that sort of explains it. Now again, we're sort of jaded, we've seen this, that's just overdone, but I think that's actually what he was probably doing, and it probably
Yeah,
makes sense now.
makes
That
sense.
makes more sense.
The only thing I could think of where it could get you is movie previews. I think of like Tropic Thunder started with 5 movie trailers, and you figure out quite quickly that these aren't real movie trailers when you see, the content of the trailer. But that was one experience where the framing device actually did trick me. Like I was about halfway through the first movie trailer until I realized, oh, this is part of a joke that's part of this. So
Yeah,
imagine
there's
you.
so few of those framing devices don't work anymore because
Mhm.
we're waiting to be tricked in some ways. It's like M. Night Shyamalan cannot, I mean, he can try to fool you, but we're all looking for it.
Mhm.
So it's not the same when you keep seeing his movies because you're waiting for the trick. And then, I think people go into these movies and they figure out very quickly, like, oh, this isn't real. The tone has changed. We pick up on those. We notice that the tone is totally different, or the quality of this trailer is way better than the quality of a
Mhm.
normal trailer. It can't be. It has to be the movie itself. So I think we pick up on them more quickly.
Yeah. But I think for him too, it's part of for Dusan and for the Naked City, and for Ward who wrote it. It's supposed to be. It's supposed to mm, reflect on the reality of crime in a more substantial way. Obviously, the woman who was murdered is actually based on a real murder that they're drawing from. That she was killed in this apartment building, and the author, sort of believed it was covered up because the guy who might have killed her might have been from high society, that type of thing. So he has his own little conspiracy theory he's working from, but he is trying to directly also reference a particular crime, and Law and Order does that as well. So that seems to be part of the effect of it. But it's not, what's interesting about it, it's just not that dire of an opening, right? It seems to be pretty friendly. And the whole movie has a sort of friendliness to it, I think.
Yeah, because the one cop is kind of your dopey, friendly neighborhood cop guy, right? He's
Hmm.
making mistakes all the time. I think that's one of the reasons why the Naked City feels so friendly. Is most of the POV is happy, happy, chappy, chappy cop
Hmm.
guy going around trying to find him.
He's making the same mistakes that I made when I was his age.
I
I
was
love Barry
hoping he'd be
Fitzgerald.
better.
I love Barry Fitzgerald. I actually really like him, so it was fun to see him in this.
Yeah. Yeah, and the cop is not conventional either. Apparently, Barry Fitzgerald was like, I can't do this. I'm a tiny little old Irishman. I'm not Humphrey Bogart. And they're like, no, that's the point, is that you're not Humphrey Bogart. That's the idea. That's what we're going for.
Well, and he stays in complete safety almost the whole movie. He doesn't leave that police station unless he's going to some fancy apartment. So that might be another reason why it feels friendly, and because none of our characters are in danger until the very end.
Mhm.
And even that, it's his naivete that kind of got him there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like the Bone Collector where you can have, the dude in the wheelchair just hanging out there the whole time.
Mhm.
That's a good reference, right?
The Bone
I
Collector.
don't think I've
Yes.
seen it. Is that Denzel Washington?
Yeah, it's so
Yes.
Washington.
Yeah, I've seen it. I read the book. I
It's
even read the book.
God, why? It's really bad.
It's really, the book is actually it's actually a fairly good reference. The book is intensely interested in how a forensic scientist actually would go about their job. The book goes into immense detail.
But so many of these things is that they're trying to do. What's the not SVU, not the NCIS, the other one, the
CSI
CINCC,
Miami.
CSI. CSI. But that's what CSI is trying to do. They're trying to do this whole thing where they're trying to make it look like, and then they go to the lab and there's all these bubbles and there's all this kind of fancy stuff and they can come out and be like, he was at a plant in New Jersey on the, I'm like, but that they're trying to do that kind of thing. They're
Mhm.
trying to sort of bring in the mundane.
Mhm.
What was that one? The Bones one? There was that Bones TV show
Bones,
which was trying
yeah.
to do that, and they just
Mhm.
had to keep coming up with reasons why the bodies didn't have any skin on them. They were really coming up with they were really stretching that by like the fourth season. How many bodies could be found that had no skin on them?
Is
But
that the plot of that show? I've never seen it.
yeah, she's a forensic scientist who specializes in like bones. So
Mhm.
that's her, and her nickname, I think her nickname is Bones, and so they have to keep like so they have to come up with bodies that are heavily, heavily decomposed. So she's not doing like autopsies on them. She only gets to work with the bones of the bodies. But this is how
Who
absurd
came
these
up
things
with
have to
that?
become. But this is my point. And then
Can I
they have
just see her
Angel, and
resume?
then there's
I only do
Angel
bones.
from what's it called? There's Angel from
Yeah,
Buffy in there too.
yeah, David
But
Boreanaz.
yeah, David Boreanaz. And I mean, this is the problem with the modern police procedural is that everybody's like, oh, I gotta come up with something new.
It's a
And
thingness. It's the thingness problem. It's there needs to be a thing. There needs to be. We can't just have a good cop show. There needs to be a thing that we can hang our hat on that other people haven't done. Um,
and that's my problem with a lot of this is my theory is this is why I like reading a lot of, especially I read a lot of history books, and especially you read a lot of quote unquote modern history books, meaning books that have been written in the last 10, 15 years about periods a long time ago. Oftentimes when they write them, they're approaching them and they're like, this topic has been done to death. Like, what am I going to say about the Roman Empire? Like, what, there is no new angle, there's no new documents, there's nothing I can say. So what they do is they take their material and they're like, I am going to tell you the story of the Roman Empire, but I'm going to make it a modern point about immigration policies. And it's so obvious how they're trying to like draw parallels to the modern day. And they do it so much because they're trying. So it's like you actually aren't really getting the original story. You're sort of getting it with this lens that the author's trying to make it original. And that's what's happening with so many of these, like the Law and Order ones and all this kind of stuff. People are trying to basically tell you a story, but they're like, I gotta give it a unique twist. And so they just add on these sort of layers, yeah, of absurdity onto them where you just kind of the story just gets so bloated that maybe you could do a few episodes of it, but after a while it just is it's absurd.
mhm.
Um, so that's why I find it really interesting just seeing a police procedural where it's actually new and it's the newness here, the thingness here is that they aren't trying to jump a shark. They're not trying to impress you with like, oh, this is a thinly veiled reference to the Michael Jackson trial. And that's why you're going to watch 4 episodes of this television show, and it's going to continue into next season because you know that the story with this thing is, and you're trying to watch it. It's just no, this is just literally a dude wandering around, and it's really hot, and and they're gonna make that the story. And I think it's got a pure, it's like a really interesting to see how some of these early stories work in terms of they're not trying to tell you something. And I agree to your point, Tom. There is a social thing here. But I would say that modern stories have that too. They're just more overt in it. This I think is it's including the social aspect in order to tell a story. I don't think, it's sort of like in order to give it grounding in reality, it does have those elements, but I don't think they don't feel grafted.
No, I agree. I don't think there's not a like a widget that has to be attached in order to make this seem new or fresh or what have you. In fact, it seems to be the widget, if anything, is actual police work, is
Yeah.
actually the work of it is investigation. And it's something I like about it too, is it's very panoramic. We get the cop at his house with his wife and kid, and they have a discussion about, should we spank or not? And it's sort of like the guy's like, I really, really, really don't want to spank my kid, but my wife is putting pressure on me. Oh, oh, I gotta go. I can't. Like that whole scene doesn't add anything to the plot at all. It just gives you a sort of vision of what life is like for different people. And that seems to be the case here. They want to show a sort of bit of life for these people, even life that isn't relevant. We don't have that in Stray Dog. We see a little bit of what their life must be like when the more senior cop takes the junior cop home, but there isn't a separate independent element of this is actually what this man's day to day is probably like. This is what the mundane is like in this world. And it's not particularly depressing. It's not, over the top glorious. It's pretty normal and it's pretty fine.
Because even the scene where they go back to the boss's house, it's doing work for the movie because
Mhm.
he feels guiltier that his gun now has been used to shoot his friend, that he's seen the family and we've seen the family. It's not superfluous like in The Naked City.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it serves a sort of plot or emotional arc.
The only thing I will say, I thought they were making. I agree. It absolutely serves a function in Stray Dog. I wasn't sure if they were trying to make a point though in Naked City, because there is the only reason I thought they might have been trying. And again, I'm not sure if they were trying to make a point or whether they're playing with a theme. Is because the parents of the girl who was murdered kept being like, maybe if we had spent more time disciplining her and put her
Oh,
in her place.
yes.
There was a whole
Yep.
thing. There was somewhat a theme about at least I think it's there, and I'm not sure if that scene was meant to comment on it or not. But there is a theme of not disciplining children in their childhood, and then they grow up to do bad things. And I wasn't sure if that scene was meant to be a play on it,
Mhm.
in the sense that okay, we blame those old, not that we blame that old couple, because that's I gotta say that shot at the end of the movie where they're just sitting on their porch
Mhm.
is kind of devastating.
Yeah.
um but I also, and I don't know if other movies did this as well, but this movie does do both of these movies really try to make you feel really bad for the people who are the victims of the crimes, more so than most other movies do. Most of the time it's just a dead body and then the detective solves it. This one does also seem to do that, but anyway, that's another story. But I didn't know if it was trying to be like, it's easy to look at the couple whose daughter was murdered and be like, yeah, they were bad parents, they should have disciplined her more, and they should have, like, I don't know if that would have been what was triggered there. And then you see them at home and it's like, well, that's why he doesn't discipline them, because you know what, he doesn't want to whip his child, understandably, and he kind of sees it as like a good thing that his kid isn't afraid to cross Northern Boulevard, although Northern Boulevard is horrifying. If you've ever I used to cross that street and it's terrifying. But I got, I wasn't, I think that might have been a commentary there, but I don't think it was overt.
Oh, okay. I didn't pick that up, to be honest.
again, that's why I don't think it doesn't feel grafted on, but I
Hmm.
just think it was weird that they have a scene where they have a dad talking about disciplining his child and trying to get out of it and avoiding disciplining his child. And very shortly thereafter, we meet the parents of a girl who's been murdered because they say they didn't discipline her enough in her childhood.
Hmm.
Like it just felt like there was an attempt at a juxtaposition there. And I don't think they were trying to make a direct link,
Hmm.
but I just it felt like it was couldn't have been accidental.
Yeah, that is interesting. Maybe it's not a comment on should you or shouldn't you discipline your child, but it's creating, it's sort of creating a harmony between
It's
these two
pulling, yeah,
scenes.
it's pulling blame off of I thought it was pulling blame off of the parents of the girl, that you weren't just supposed to be like, oh, the reason she ended up the way she did is because of the parents.
Yeah.
That it's not meant to say whether or not you should do something. It's trying to create conflicts. It's trying
Mhm.
to create conflicting views, and there's no answer, but it's trying to create a conflicting view where you don't just go in and say this is this and this is this, this is black, this is white. It's trying to create conflicts. It's trying to create conflicting views so you can't settle in. I don't know, but that was
That
the only.
that's a good reading. Yeah, I can take that reading. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
It also could be I was just trying to give that scene meaning or understand why it was there because it had no sense being there, and so I'm trying to apply it and wonder why that wasn't like Treebeard's poem in Lord of the Rings where it makes sense why it was cut.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense to me that you would have that in there. I didn't see any commentary on why that scene existed. I'll look for it, but yeah, that makes sense. I got the sense of they're very desperate to
If it's
give
not there, tell me because I'm writing it and I'm gonna.
publish it in a journal,
Yeah,
and
I'm gonna
three people are
publish.
gonna read it
Yeah,
and
3 people will
forget
see
about it
it
in
and
two
it will
weeks.
be on my curriculum vitae.
Start a podcast.
Oh yeah, it's on our podcast. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh, Lord. Oh. So, any closing thoughts on the Naked City? Anything we want to else bring up about this?
Between the narration and then what you're saying, Tom, the extraneous scenes, the whole time I'm watching this movie, I'm waiting for the moment where I'm like, oh, Kurosawa saw this and said, yes, this is what's inspiring me to make a movie.
Mm.
But I never quite caught that. Whatever he saw in this movie, I didn't see it.
Well, there seems to be a lot of kind of thematic and even visual overlap in there.
Oh, sure, between this and Stray Dog, absolutely. But I hadn't seen Stray Dog yet. I was
Oh, you
waiting to
were waiting
see,
for like,
right, like,
what's the exciting
oh
thing
yeah,
that made
right,
him desperate to?
like jump up, get a script going, like make a whole movie.
I
Like,
think it's, and I have a feeling. I mean, again, Stray Dog is much better. I really, I liked Naked City, but Stray Dog is a much better movie. It's a
Mm.
much better made movie. This is the first Kurosawa movie I've ever seen. So,
Oh.
it's a really good, well made movie. It's a shockingly well made movie. I really liked it. But my gut says if he watched this movie, the thing that stands out to me about it is I love how it brings the city. There aren't, I always say, I think I've said it before. I hate the phrase like the city is a character in this movie. I hate that phrase. But this movie, it's not that it's a character, but this feels incredibly grounded in New York City in a way that most movies don't. Like most movies that take place in New York City, they'll show a background, they'll do an establishing shot, and then you're in a studio or you're on a block outside of Wall Street that's closed, that's been closed to all traffic. We used to actually see, speaking of SVU, they used to film that in Queens, right near where I lived. So we would constantly be out there and be like, oh, that stupid SVU is filming down the street again. And you'd constantly have it because the streets of Queens look like New York, but they're easier to close. So they used to constantly close the streets in Queens, and they would do that. Scorsese filmed a movie out there. There was just like constantly having the streets closed for these things. So, but they always felt, you watch them, they feel like streets that have been closed. This didn't feel like that. This actually has a feeling of actually being filmed in New York City and people wandering around in the background. It's a really neat effect as to how well it does actually feel like a documentary or a news story being filmed on the street. So I don't know if that's what he saw and really liked the sort of the mundane aspect of the plot, where it's just a bunch of people wandering around having to solve a crime, and they solve it by again showing pictures and doing interviews, and then they pick up one piece of clue and then they go to the next spot and then they go to the next spot. There's no grand thing there. And so, but I feel like those two elements, sort of the mundaneness becoming dramatic, and the way that a whole city, the community, I agree with you, Tom. It's a community thing. There's this idea of things happening by committee and by community as a whole that I feel like is really appealing. I don't know if other movies had that aspect around this time period, but it's the only movie I know of that evokes it to that extent, that it was noticeable for a movie.
And a lot of it was filmed in the areas where it took place, right? They really were determined to film not in a studio in New York, in the areas where they said the scene was taking place, as much as they could.
Well, that was why when I was texting with Tom and I asked him, I'm like, oh, where was that theater you did this one show, that a couple shows that I'd seen Tom in? Because I thought that there was a precinct that was right near that theater, and I thought that the precinct that they had shot as the outside of that precinct 12 or whatever was that same precinct. It wasn't, but it was evocative enough that I thought, oh, I know where that is. Like, I know that spot. And again, there was a number of spots in when they were in Jackson Heights. I knew exactly where they were at one point when the subways were coming out of the ground. Like, I knew exactly which station that was. There were certain spots where I knew exactly where they were. There's an absolute sense of place that's there.
Yeah, that comes through. And that apparently was one of the inspirations for Kurosawa, who part of this whole Japanese movement that's coming out of World War II um, is that you're going to film on location. That seems to be a big drive for him. And you see it in a lot of his movies, in High and Low, his other really wonderful, I think even better, noir film. And it's also the case with this. I think both of these movies have a sense of location. Kurosawa was very much interested in filming in the slums where he said the thing was taking place, right? He's interested in capturing those spaces. And that, I think, is one of the commonalities here.
I was going to throw out The Bad Sleep Well, another Kurosawa film. Also, the locations they go to there is incredible. One is in a burnt down factory that was making, munitions or something for World War II that had burned down, and he uses as a location for, again, Mifune to hang out for a while. So The Bad Sleep Well was another great Kurosawa location film.
And this way, this movie I think really reminded me a lot of The Third Man in terms of
Yes.
in terms of the way they film it and in terms of the soundscape. The way that they incorporate sound into the movie is really reminds me of The Third Man.
Mhm.
And they both did the same thing. They were like, I know when they filmed The Third Man, the whole thing was he wanted to get there early because his big concern was that they would rebuild Vienna before he got a chance to film in the rubble. So they got there as quickly as they could before they had a chance to rebuild the city. So when they're climbing over giant piles of rubble, that's not just like a studio where they just kind of, took a bunch of dirt. They actually are climbing over the rubble of some of these buildings. So the both of these movies had that sense of post-war space.
Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, I you feel that, and it's a good point too, KJ. The example from The Bad Sleep Well. It's not only is it a reflection of the war, it's actually a burned out munition factory from that episode. Um, and that seems to be what drives him. The other thing too, obviously, is the police procedural element, which for Kurosawa, and he's such an inspiration on the directors that come right after him, allows him to look at these different social institutions and how they're interacting and how groups of people interact as opposed to individual psyches. I don't think we see that in The Naked City at all. We don't see individual psyches. They're much more interested in how this organization works. And that's also the case in Stray Dog. We don't really, as you say, Pat, we don't really know much about why they committed the crime. He wanted to impress a lady and get some money in order to do that. Who he is as a person, it's hinted at. He seems to be when we meet him, the criminal, sort of a weaker man than we expect. He's not this badass killer. He's a man who cries when he's arrested. But outside of that, that isn't really Kurosawa's interest. And that seems to be another thing these share. They're not interested in the kind of the deranged psyche that is mapped onto the world. They're much more interested in these groups of people and how they interact. Yeah, that kind of thing seems to be a commonality between these two.
And I mean, they make it very clear in Stray Dog as well. Stray Dog, and I don't know if this is sort of a post-war commentary as well. They make it very clear in Stray Dog that he says you can't spend all of your time trying to think of why the criminal did what they did. You just have to know that they did something bad, and if the person does a bad thing, then they're bad and they need to be punished. Like there's sort of this element of like we can't spend all of our time chasing this all down and trying to understand why they did what they did. We're not here for that. That's not our job. We're here to just find the person who did the bad thing, and then then it gets tossed on.
I think that's what the older cop said, but
That
I think
is,
the
yes,
movie
yes.
was very sympathetic
Mhm.
to the murderer in this case. I think we were supposed to walk away thinking, oh, wow, Mifune could have easily ended up in the same boat as the murderer. In fact, let me ask you guys this. Do you think the title, The Stray Dog, was referring to the murderer or to Mifune?
Well, I think initially it's the gun.
I think it was referring to the viewer. It's referring to all of us together. We are all the straight. I'm kidding.
Yeah, it's obviously referring to is his name Honda or Yusa?
No,
It's
Honda was the guy that had the ration card.
oh right, okay, so it's Yusa then. So it's obviously in one sense Yusa. I think it's also
I agree, though. I think you could make
the
the
gun.
argument that it's meant to refer to the police officers as well.
Yeah.
I think it's Mifune because
Mhm.
I think the stray dog eventually became the mad dog. But Mifune was also a stray dog until he found he could be a cop. So it's kind of referring to everybody who came out of that war that's struggling with all these, post-war.
Problems.
Yeah, I would
Yep,
agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
they're all the stray dog, and then where they end up. And I think that's what the movie was really about.
But I think, but I differ. But the thing I would argue is, I think you're right. But I think the movie is saying, this is why I say I don't know if this is a commentary on post-war, is that it doesn't actually matter. Like we get it. We are all coming out of this really bad thing. You can't use that as an excuse to do bad things. Like if you do a bad thing, you have to be punished. Like both of these characters came out of the same situation, and one of them chose the right thing and one of them chose the wrong thing. We don't get to say that they're morally equivalent. We get to praise the guy who did the right thing and sort of say the guy who did the wrong thing is bad. Like I feel like it's meant to say a little bit of like you can't use this as a crutch. You have to make a choice.
I think that's true. I do think Kurosawa is very much interested in how the situation of poverty is shaping these people, though. And I think you're right. I think eventually it's
But
like,
I don't think he's giving it an excuse. I agree. He's not, he's trying to say that this is a bad thing. Maybe we need to do something about it. We need to help people. But I do think there's still an element that there is sort of you make a choice. Like you make a choice that you have to live with those consequences. You can't keep pointing fingers backwards and backwards and backwards.
right. And I think that's true. And you get the example of that is the woman who gets shot and her dowry is robbed, and now she has to wait several years in order to have enough money for a dowry, at which point she will no longer be young. I think that's one of those moments of
Or even
incredible.
the like, why are these tomatoes gets to grow, but my wife is dead. Why is life continuing when she's dead? Like you get to see very clearly the consequences of their crimes and how bad those consequences are. And so you can certainly sympathize with the person. You can certainly say like we wish that this hadn't happened, or maybe there are ways we could avoid it. But I don't think it's making a moral equivalent between the two.
I don't think it's making a moral equivalent, but I do think it is saying he spends so much time in the underworld. And it's not just, a fat
Some of them are good
man's,
people. Yeah, some of them are good
yeah,
people. Like they're not bad
but
people.
it's not just that. It's none of them are fat men named Gutman stealing falcons, right? These are like desperate people. They're really poor. They're real. I think the heat is a part of that element that helps you understand that.
Fair enough. Yeah.
The sweat budget must have been out of
I
control for
was
this
thinking that. I
movie.
was thinking that. I'm like, man, they must have been spraying these guys are glistening. They're glistening.
Or it was just summer in Japan, but either way.
Does Japan normally get really hot in the summer? Is that
The humidity is something I've never experienced anywhere else on the planet. It is unbelievable.
I will not go there.
Kurosawa in High and Low, it also takes place in the heat, and a big part of that is the rich family has air conditioning. That's a big factor in it. But apparently, Kurosawa liked to film hot scenes in the cold because he thought the actors then had to be conscious about performing sweat. So this actually might have been filmed in a chilly environment, in spite of the fact that it looks utterly painful with the humidity. But I, you
And
know,
that, by the way, this movie does a much. I know that Naked City is supposed to be hot because they kept telling me,
mhm,
but I never got the sort of impression that it was hot. In Stray Dog, I'm like, man, I'm watching that. It does feel like that feels hot. Like I know that feeling because I just,
mhm,
we just came out of a few days of that, and so it's like, man, I know that feeling. That feels exact. That's exactly what that feels like. It
mhm,
was that was fun. He does it. That's another one of the many reasons why this is a better movie. It has
mhm.
a much better atmosphere.
And Kurosawa puts a moving fan in almost every scene where people are
Yeah.
sitting. But
But I think the heat is part of that, where you just see these people are just like down to the ground, and I think they're not wearing any clothes, and we see that with the women who initially it starts off as kind of sexy. Then we see these women who are dancing and they're very attractive, what have you, and then we see them in the back room, and they just are in a pile on top of each other, dying, like they can barely breathe. They're just so hot. And I think that kind of juxtaposition is intentional. It's this world is sort of a broken world. And it's not broken in the way the long goodbye, the book The Long Goodbye is a broken world where we just have individuals who are failing, right? That's true in Stray Dog. That man, Yusa is the name of the killer. Yeah, Yusa. He has failed. He has come back from the war and he has failed to act in a humane or normal way. But yes, and there isn't a moral equivalency between him and Mifune's character. Um, but I don't think we can get away from the sort of accusation Kurosawa is putting forward, which is y'all just screwed up. You had this giant war that happened. It didn't do anything. We're now all in poverty. I think the fact that ration cards are being cited so frequently is not an accident, right? They're trading ration cards and not even money for to rent a gun to commit crimes. I mean, that is a very desperate situation. And I think you're right. Eventually, there's what they call the après-guerre, the people who come back. And I think there is people who have the moral compass to respond to duty, right? Which is what Mufune's character does. It's all about duty. And the reason why he is so incensed about losing his cult is that he screwed up his duty. And the older cop has to kind of give him more wisdom. It doesn't matter if you lost the gun. If it would have
Somebody
been a
else, yeah, it would have
Browning.
been a different gun. Yeah, it
It
would
would
have
have been
been
a
a different gun.
Browning, not a Colt. Yeah, but still,
I know we talked about this at the end of last week, but I did love that one scene because I was, again, I'm thinking it being like, nobody cares, bro. When he's at the hospital and the other guy has been shot and he's saying like, I can't believe it was my gun. And he does, one of the other cops says like, nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Shut up!
Stop
Shut
bringing,
up!
yeah, like stop bringing up your stupid gun. And I'm like, okay, so it is supposed to be that way because that man, I'm like, shut up about it, bro.
Yeah.
Way to make every problem your own. Your
Mhm.
own.
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I thought the old cop was lock him up, throw away the key, whereas Mifune was no, there might be something else. Japan can heal from this. Is kind of how I thought the
I
movie
can
was
see that, yeah.
hopeful that
Mhm. That
um,
things can get better.
even though we're broken now, yeah,
Mhm.
right. We don't just have to push all this into a jail cell or
Mhm.
lock it up and forget about it. We're gonna deal with this. We're gonna
Come out
or
better.
the younger generation is gonna have enough sympathy to work on this.
That's an interesting reading of it.
Maybe that's why Naked City is so much more happy because there's no sense of that.
Yeah, well, I guess in Naked City, it's the victors who are making a movie, and
That's
in
what I mean.
Japan, it's
It's
the
the like,
losers.
hey, like we did this great thing.
Mhm.
It does have a certain sense of optimism.
Mhm.
Yes. That,
Yeah.
I guess I didn't pick up on the optimism as much. I thought it was a bit more finger wagging, but maybe that's there too.
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of, any movie that has one way of looking at it probably isn't a great movie. So I think they're all there. I do think
Hmm.
you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah. Yeah, and that ending scene is really compelling. Not the ending scene where the cop gets better and they move on, but the arrest scene is
Yeah,
really,
that's a good scene. Yeah.
really, really interesting. I think it's the only time we're really in nature, right? Should we summarize it for an audience?
Yeah, because I'm trying to remember. I watched so many of these. I'm trying to remember this end scene.
In the last scene, they figure out where Yus is going to be. He's going to take a train, and he's kind of out, not in the city anymore. And the Mufune's character. Let's stop calling him Mufune's character. What's the character's name? Detective Murakami. Detective Murakami goes to this station, and there's a bunch of like young something men in white linen suits, and he figures out which one is the man based upon the mud on the suit. And then he chases the guy has his gun. He chases him down into the woods. The criminal, shoots the detective. The detective still maintains his composure despite being shot, and chases down the guy. And they're exhausted, running through these kind of weeds and kind of swampy weeds. They're covered in mud, and he finally gets him. He finally gets the guy and arrests him. And they're just laying in the these tall grass, and the camera shoots up to this tall grass, and as it does, you see these little girls walk by singing a little school song of some sort. And as this criminal's looking up at these weeds, at this tall grass, at these flowers, there's a lot of shots of flowers, he just starts crying. And that's how that scene ends, with these two mud covered exhausted people, and one of them is just crying as these little girls sing. It's a stunning scene. um,
So even that, if Mifune is the White Knight, he gets shot, like Japan got shot during the war, but he kept going. He got there, and even though we're exhausted in the mud, we're gonna heal. To me, that's all post-war optimism that Kurosawa's putting on the screen.
I don't know. I have trouble with optimism.
I wouldn't go with Yeah, I don't think it's optimism. Like, I don't think it's a like. He's a pretty broken dude. I mean, he's sort of over the top in some ways in terms of his sense. I mean, he's almost like a dude who has to be. He's sort of a stray dog who has to be, sort of disciplined and taught. Like, no, that's not. We have to learn how to operate within this household. We don't do that. Like but it has that feeling. But I don't think it's optimism, but I also don't think it's totally just lock them all up and throw the key away pessimism. But optimism, I'm not sure I get.
Well, they're both in the mud. Even though the one made the right decisions and one made the wrong
Yes.
decisions, here they
Hmm.
are together in the mud at the bottom.
Hmm.
They can still heal from this. They can still get better.
One of them can get better, right? One of them is.
Yeah, the other dude's not. The other dude's gonna probably either, he's gonna be executed by a military tribunal. Like he's gonna be killed, like probably, or he's gonna be in prison for a very, very, very long time.
That's his life is ruined, right?
Yeah, his life is
That's why he's
ruined.
crying. It's.
He's done.
Mhm. Yeah, that I think is the. And maybe this is where it's not so easy to say pessimism or optimism. I mean, we get both of these things in this view, right? We get
They're both there,
some,
yeah.
yeah, we get someone who is potentially somebody who could do good in this society, right? And then we have somebody who is the consequence of this society. And it seems like Badia Mufuni kind of overcomes the potential dangers. I thought at first when I was watching the movie he was going to get sucked down into the mire, because he's
Mm.
so kind of degraded in the beginning of the movie. He has to go pseudo undercover as a poor guy in order to get his gun, or as a criminal.
Yeah.
That I thought in that beginning, like, he is beat up. He loses his gun. You see him wandering around. Like, you see a shot of his feet at one point, and his shoes are just falling apart as he's walking through. Um, there's one scene that he's like sleeping on a fountain, just covered in dirt, and this guy's throwing rocks at him. I thought, like, oh, he's gonna become the stray
Yeah,
dog. He's gonna go nuts.
I was waiting for the ending, which would have been a very bad ending. I was waiting for the ending where there was going to be one bullet left in the gun, and he was going to take the gun away, and then, the other guy was going to, like, surrender, and then he was going to shoot him. as though it were the like, what's in the box? Like that ending where he's
Mhm.
going to succumb to his own rage and sense of duty, and that's going to cause him to do a terrible thing. I sort of assumed that was where it was going, which it didn't, which is good. That would have been a really hackney. Well, again, I don't know if it'd be hackney, but it would have been a hokey ending. Um, but I do think there is something to the fact that yes, they both, and I still think though they both end up in the mud. They both came from essentially the same location in the sense that they say they came from the same background. They both were very poor. They both had their bags stolen from them on the train, and one made the right decision, one made the bad decision. I think it is saying that yes, there is a sense that one succumbed to the bad things in society and one overcame them, but I don't think it's saying like therefore they therefore we should forgive the guy who did the bad thing because he could the good guy could have made the same bad decision. Like I don't think it's saying that.
No, I don't. But there's a difference between forgiveness and sympathy.
Yes, exactly. I think you're meant to temper. I think this is meant to temper your thing. You're not meant to just sort of say therefore this person is a horrible person. There's just something fundamentally wrong with them and we should condemn them, and we shouldn't just praise the one dude who managed to overcome it. There's a sense in which the one dude who managed to overcome it has his own faults.
Yeah, and I think the fact that we're looking at organizations again, like in Naked City, and I think this is a big inspiration why the Naked City was such an inspiration for Kurosawa, at least according to Kurosawa, and I think it registers on screen as a sort of inspiration, though maybe adaptation is too rich a term for the relationship between these movies. Is
Yeah,
that
but we needed to get to Japan, so
yeah.
this is how we got
We
here.
needed to shove these things in a box, and this is the box we shove them in. So sorry,
And they were good
audience.
movies, so
And
you
they
know
were good
what? At least we
movies.
didn't. At
Yeah.
least we didn't have to read a bad book in a bad movie, which we've done before.
We have done a few times, or listen to a really good soundtrack and watch a really bad movie. But anyway, um, yeah, so I think it's also still spread out. The cause of these crimes is in society, not in an individual. I think that's still going on here. In Naked City, it's a little less. The cause of the crime is less interesting. We don't know why this guy's really doing it, other than he wants money and people kind of want money. Naked City is far more interested in social organizations as solutions. It really doesn't want to delve into the why of crime or anything like that. And I think here it's crime seems to be a product of these kind of social forces, which is your standard. This is not anything groundbreaking to say, but I don't know how much of that you see in crime movies. And it's interesting, apparently crime movies and gangster movies were outlawed in Japan during the war, and after the war, around this period, this is the first time you were allowed to make them. And so a lot of them have this kind of real gritty or angry feel to them. It's like they let the cat out of the bag, so to speak. And I think that's another connection there is this sort of this sudden turn on the society you're living after this war happened. And yet one is the victors looking at the society where here we have this social organization of cops and they'll make everything better. And we just have to appreciate the hard work they do. It's not about muscle or genius intellect. It's walking the beat, getting the job done, going home at the end of the day to the wife and knowing you did the job well. And the other one, it is here are two guys covered in dirt. One of them can possibly save this society if he works well within this social organization. I don't think anything Kurosawa is doing is like beating up on the cops at all. He seems to be his fault. The fault seems to be far more grand than that. And then there's this other guy who is just sort of a product of not an individual broken psyche, but of a social atmosphere that has lost, right? A society and a nation that has lost. And that seems to be a sort of reflection of the Naked City, as we've more or less discussed already. It's also a gorgeous looking movie too, as Kurosawa movies are.
It's a
Uh,
beautiful, beautiful
yeah.
movie. It's
Mm.
really attractive. It's a much better movie. I mean, it's much better, and I assume that's Kurosawa.
Mhm.
Um, are his other movies in this vein, or are they?
I've been holding my tongue. All his other movies that I've seen are so much more
Yes,
gorgeous than
I
this
would
one.
say
Audience, this
that.
is the only one you've seen. This one looks like a
But it's
dog
beautiful. It is
compared
a
to these.
beautiful movie. It is.
Watch his other movie. Watch the first 3 minutes after the opening credits of The Bad Sleep Well. It's incredible. It's one of the greatest. I called my wife, said, when you get home, I need to show you this sequence because it's
Or
absolutely
that
gorgeous.
cantina sequence in High and Low with the
Oh my gosh.
glass ceiling or the sloping glass. Yeah, that
Unbelievable.
is. Oh God, that is hard to. It's just a scene of like GIs dancing in this kind of Japanese cantina bar, and the ceiling is glass, and it starts on the glass, and the camera just moves through this bar, and you have no idea where you are at first until you realize, oh, I'm looking at these people through glass, and then it comes down, and it's a great way to introduce a room because you're confused, and so you're trying to put it together, and then you do. That is one of High and Low is one of the best looking movies I think I've ever seen. And it's also one of these movies where not only the compositions look great, they actually have these kind of sort of symbolic significance.
Yes, and in the Bad Sleep Well, again, that first 3 minutes, the same idea. The what the camera is telling the story just as much as anything else on screen or that you hear. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, and Kurosawa, he kind of goes off the deep end later. I mean, when you get to Ron, have you seen
I've
Ron?
started a few times, but I haven't gotten through.
It's hard. It's his version of King Lear. And
Yeah.
it's a very late Kurosawa movie. I think it's 1985. And it's really long. And it's also it is really beautiful, but it's one of these things of like every shot is going to be a gorgeous shot of people of giant armies running in certain patterns that look. And after a while, you're like, this is a very long, long movie with men dying as they drop beautiful flags or scrolls of writing into the air. And after a while, you're like, oh God, you're too talented for your own good. But
That's why everybody needs an editor.
yeah. Do we want to talk about other noir that we've seen, Japanese noir? I mean, I know KJ, you've seen a lot. Was there any that jumped out at you as particularly special?
So I watched a few of the movies on the Criterion. I tried to get through more, but the one that really stood out was Stakeout. So, audience, if you get a chance to watch Stakeout, it's takes place in Japan, but it starts in Tokyo, and they think the murderer has gone to Saga, which is all the way in the southern part of Japan. So it starts with our two cop heroes getting on a train and taking the train all the way to this southern city in Japan, and they go through every major city in Japan, and they always call it out. It's like this big rally cry for Japan as they're naming all these, iconic Japanese cities. And then most of the movie takes place in a hotel room they rent across the street from where they think the murderer is going to go. And it's a very open hotel room with windows on all sides. And most of the movie, you're just up in that hotel room with them looking at the house across the street. And it is a wonderful 2 hours to spend with them. I don't know how they did it, but it's great and it's absolutely gorgeous. So if you get a chance to watch Stakeout's my recommend out of all the ones that I saw. How about you, Tom? How about some of the ones that you saw?
Well, two I was watching for this, and they're very different. One of them is Masahiro Shinoda's Pale Flower, which is about a Yakuza man who, did you see
I
it?
did. I did.
Oh, didn't like it?
I thought, well, it's right. So it's about a Yakuza guy who gets out of jail and then tries to look cool by gambling and driving in cool cars and then ends up back in jail. Like it was just a movie trying to look cool, but they didn't do it. They couldn't do it. And it was so obvious after watching the two Kurosawa movies that they were trying so hard with the lighting and the smoke and again, the cars and the quick cuts, but it just didn't connect
Oh, I
the
didn't
same
feel
way.
it.
But what do you
Yeah,
think?
I don't think it has the kind of the completeness or smartness of Kurosawa. It has one of the best soundtrack slash diegetic sound system relationships that I think
Oh yeah, with the
I've seen in
cars,
a movie in a while.
Stray Dog has that too, though.
Stray Dog does,
Stray
yeah.
Dog love. That's why I said I love the soundscape of Stray Dog. It's one of the other than Third Man. Third Man has really good sound, and this movie also has just lovely sound. Even when they're having the shootout and they have the woman in playing the piano in the back, and I
Yes.
love the sound. The sound in Stray Dog is so good. The hand organs, it's like a whole scene with like a hand organ and like organ grinder out on the street, and like, oh, there's so many great just like background music, and just the water dripping. Whoever, I mean, this is one of those things where like if it was an American movie, I would have assumed it would win Best Sound at Academy Awards. So good, the sound. I love the sound.
Yeah. The sound of the music coming over the phone when
Mm.
the
Yeah.
older police officer gets shot. I mean, it becomes a way of signaling things. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just like it's really impressive what they do. Not a lot of movies do that, and especially at that time period. There's just they don't do sound. I mean, I get it. Sound is incredibly hard at that time period. Did you ever have to do that in college, where we used to have to literally take the strips of sound and cut them? You would cut them and you would have to line them up. Like you literally had to cut and paste the sound pieces to
Oh,
make sound. We had to do that.
I did it on a computer.
Oh no, we had to do the physical thing
Oh, I
on
did it on a computer when I had to do my sound
Oh
design.
no, we had to do the physical cutting, and you had to I mean, it's so hard. I'm like, that's why I'm like, I get the clapboard thing because you need to have a signal thing to line it all up, and so you literally would cut pieces of sound out, and so I imagine it was an inordinately difficult task, and they do such a good job with the sound of Stray Dog.
Yeah. There's a scene in, there's a gambling table in Pale Flower, and there people are sitting around, and the way they gamble is with these little tiles. They have such a percussive sound. And whenever you see all of these gangsters and this one really bizarre woman sitting around this table playing this card game, the the soundtrack is very much sounds like California 1960s compositions, where it was just this heavy kind of dissonant percussion music. And that mirrors or matches or works with the sound of these cards being played. And the sound is dazzling in that scene. Um, and it works well with also her face, the female lead, who has this sort of like dead-eyed expression that's kind of fascinating to watch. I really like that movie. I get what you're saying with like the cool guy who wanders around and whatever. I don't think he's that interesting. I think
Is he like the Japanese Holden Caulfield? Is that like
no,
is that the
no,
like?
he's like, he's like,
Entourage. The show
yeah,
Entourage.
Okay,
he's just
okay.
like he's got his stark
I hadn't
glasses
seen. I've
on.
seen.
I've not seen it,
Yeah.
but I think I've
No,
seen a
I know.
poster
Yeah.
or whatever. Like that's
I've seen people who watched it and quoted it.
The other one I wanted to mention too was Sichun Suzuki's Branded to Kill. Did you see that?
no, I didn't get to that one.
That so he it was this one actor who's, oh, I forgot his name all of a sudden, but he was this action star who when he was younger people said you're not attractive enough, so he got cheek implants, which made him look really strange. But after that he became a big action star, and he's the star of this. And Branded to Kill is like, it starts with his job is to basically move a gangster from one place to another, like drive him somewhere. And then it moves into this sort
Isn't
of,
there a movie called like Driver or something like that?
yeah, yeah, like that.
Is there an actual? Isn't there a movie called that or something?
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. I'm sure it's called some. I know Jason Statham stars in it, so
Yeah.
that's all
Okay.
you need to know.
Yeah.
Um, but then it becomes this like hallucinogenic trip with this woman who keeps emerging out of water, and all of these like bizarre and weird things happen. It's a really trippy movie. I don't really know what to make of it, but it is an strange little noir. That being said, I know KJ, you saw this too. I think the one I recommend out of these movies we've seen, is probably High and Low.
Oh my gosh, High and Low
Yeah.
is top 10 movie of mine. It's really good. Yeah, we actually did it on our other podcast, Talking Pictures Trivia. If you want to hear us talking more about it, so go check that out.
I will check that one out. The movie and the podcast.
Wow,
Oh, thanks.
what an
Thanks,
endorsement!
friend.
We'll get a whole listen.
The experienced officer in Stray Dog, and I don't know if he was intentionally doing it or not, but reminded me a lot of the officer in Three Body Problem.
Oh, yeah, Benedict Wong.
Doesn't he though? But
Yeah,
it's like the general demeanor.
yeah, that sort of
And just sort of-
slouching.
Yeah, it was just the overall approach was just and I don't know if he was doing that intentionally or not, but it just had that, just the way he talked.
The confident schlep.
Yeah, just this
Hmm.
it's the confidence. That's the it's a good that's a very good word for it. And so no idea if he was consciously doing it, but I really liked that for the competent schlep thing. I really enjoyed that. I think it's interesting that these both of these films, and I don't know if other none of the other ones we've really done really, really focus on the family and the victims of the crime. And they don't just say like, oh, a crime was committed, we need to go solve it. Even the one with the dowry, it's like, oh, she was robbed. It wasn't enough that she was robbed. It wasn't enough that she was shot. Most movies would just move on. But they really wanted to make it clear of like the human consequences was that she lost her dowry. She had been saving her dowry. She hadn't been able to get married to her fiance because of the war, and now she was going to have to delay her marriage for another 3 years to save up money for her dowry, and therefore this was a really, and she was going to be too old. Like it really hammers home the human consequences of that crime. And they do the same thing with the parents in Naked City. I don't think any of the other movies we've done have tried to tug at the, not just the heartstrings, but to sort of make crime very humanly represented. The other movies haven't really done that, right? Maybe Girl with the Dragon Tattoo to some
It's the
extent.
Yeah, I
closest.
was gonna say Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
That's the exception. But I think most of them haven't done it, right?
Yeah, I think Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the crime that comes home is what happens to Salander, because we see that
Yes.
on screen. It turns out the crime with the other women, we don't even know their names, the women who are murdered. Or we learned some of their
We
names, but we
learned
don't know.
some names, but
We
mostly
don't
their
really,
initials. Yeah, they're mostly
yeah.
initials and things. Yeah. I just
Mhm.
I just thought it was interesting that this movie, but even if you didn't, that they still function in that way. Even if you have a name, we have the names of people who were
Yeah,
murdered,
but it
the
doesn't give them
by
a,
Alexander, or not by Alexander Bonaparte, but cussed by the other C
yeah.
person. We have the names of the people who are murdered in these things, but we're not meant, they're tools.
Mhm.
But I think Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and maybe this is again part of the thing where we're talking about Japanese noir and Nordic noir, that there's something interesting going on where crime isn't just for fun, it's not just for solving things. It is meant to make more of a commentary on the society that's generating the crime, both on explaining why people are ending up criminals, although Girl with the Dragon Tattoo doesn't do that part, which I think is its mistake, but more looking at the consequences of those crimes and what it means to the society as a whole. I think this movie does a good job of that. Um,
Double Indemnity also gives us the daughter a little bit.
That's true, actually. They do. Double Indemnity does do that. Double Indemnity is actually tries to make that true. The book really tries to hammer it, really tries to make it clear that the daughter is really suffering. Didn't think about that one. That's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, the Naked City, the parents at the end, and the parents
That's
when
that's that is
that's
just such a
brutal.
brutal
Yeah,
scene.
yeah,
Just seeing them sitting in their rocking chairs with nothing to do. And I mean, in your head, you're like, well, they've got another 10, 15, 20 years to live, and they didn't even seem to get along before. Like, God, it's gonna be hard for them. Like that's hard. It's hard. I thought it was hard to see.
yeah.
I adore how Honda, when they go to the baseball, when they're in the baseball stadium, and they call, they go over the loudspeaker and they first use Honda's name and he doesn't get up, and then they use his real name and he gets up and starts walking out of the concourse. Did you notice what happens before he goes down the stairs to leave the concourse?
There was a big play, and he just wanted to make sure he saw it.
And he
Yeah, yeah,
goes back to
yeah.
watch.
Mhm.
Oh, that was
So,
so
talking about
good.
that scene, there's another
So
movie we did
good.
for Talking Pictures Trivia called The Secret in Their Eyes. And in that, they're trying to find a killer, and they go to I think it's a soccer match in that one. But there was a lot of similarities. I bet you Secret in Their Eyes guys had watched The Stray Dog and pulled a lot of the crowd and the impossibility of finding somebody in this crowd
It's a
and the.
good scene in that movie.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
one of these uncut scenes, which I'm a little tired of at this point,
Yeah.
but it's old enough that it was still fresh. So it works really well, especially since they're in this giant crowd and they have to chase this guy down through the if you've ever been in a football stadium, a soccer stadium, football stadium, even a baseball stadium, like the labyrinthian way a stadium looks when you go behind or out of the stands, that movie captures that really well. Yeah, that's a good point. That reminded me of that.
And even that baseball scene, they spend a lot of time just showing the Tokyo Giants.
There's a lot of plays. You
I
watch a
right?
didn't
lot
quite
of plays.
understand why there were so many baseball players. Also,
Well,
they swing
I
the bat really weirdly.
Yeah.
They had this sort of Onus Wagner in the 19 swing style.
back then you may not have been able to see baseball unless you were in a major city. So if this movie came to your hometown, this might have been your chance to see baseball for the first time. And again, kind of hopeful for Japan for the future. Look, we're playing baseball, we're playing sports, we're doing this, we're coming back.
Yeah. Huh. Maybe
Those are my
that's
thoughts.
maybe that's why they made so much time on baseball.
I don't know. I enjoyed that.
It was
I adored the fact that he turned around and went
and
back
went
to
back
watch.
to the watch.
I just loved that. I
Yeah.
loved it
Yeah.
because it's exactly what would happen.
Mhm.
You know he would have gone back. You know he would have gone back.
Yeah. If you enjoyed Japanese noir and are looking for more from this style/movement, check out Black River, I Am Waiting, Stakeout, The Bad Sleep Well, Pale Flower, Brand to Kill, and of course, High and Low. You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adaptation, wherever fine podcasts are found. Join us next time when we discuss the 1980 novel The Name of the Rose and look at the 1986 film Adaptation.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week we'll be discussing The Name of the Rose. Pat, if you could adapt The Name of the Rose into any medium, what would it be?
So I would make a new movie, and it would be called The Name of the Bros, and it would be the same general premise, except it would take place at a frat, and it would be like an Animal House style frat version of The Name of the Rose called The Name of the Bros, and it would be actually funny, unlike the movie, which was unintentionally funny and we'll talk about it next week.
Yes, I do like that. Is it like a really good beer that's poisoned? Is just like the
Oh yeah,
can is
that's a good point. What is it gonna be? No, it's gonna have to be like it's gonna be they're gonna have like a date book because they're bros, right? They're gonna have some book
Oh
that has
yeah,
the names
yeah.
of all the girls or something like that, and then there's gonna be like that's gonna be poison, and they're all like trying to find the names of like all the all the people they've like like all the
Yeah, it's like there's some legendary
yeah, there's some
player
legendary
dated the
player, and
most women,
he
and
left
they're
the
like,
names of all the women that he'd hooked up with, and that's what this is going to be. And then they poisoned it, yeah, and they're going to have like keg stands, and it's gonna be really
oh,
good.
But he used all the Greek letters from the fraternity
Oh
things.
God, yeah, you could use Greek in here too. Oh man, this is like actually a good movie. Oh, if only I'd lived in the '80s when this book was popular. Oh man.
and
You would have
frat,
killed it in the 80s.
frat
Pat.
movies
Yeah,
were
name it.
possible.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, that was Animal House was out then. That could have been Name of the Bros.
Yeah.
Oh, it would
Yeah,
have been so
that was the
good.
letter that was the era of like Revenge of the Nerds and
Yeah,
things like that. You could do like the frat movie stuff and all that. Yeah. Oh,
man.
that would have worked really well.
Only if I did it now, if only anyone would get the joke.
uh, how about you, KJ? What would you do?
I was thinking, you guys ever play Night of the Wolf or Mafia? They're kind of games you can play with a small group of people. And when I've played it, there's cards. You get a card and you're assigned a role. You're either a wolf or a peasant or the mayor or a there's just different roles you have, but nobody else knows what your role is, and you have to guess who are the werewolves and who are the peasants. And if you can accuse a werewolf, then they lose. I forget exactly how it
Wasn't there that
works.
video game? There was that video game, the one Among Us. That was like the same premise, wasn't it?
With the imposters? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
kind of similar. But this
yeah.
is a talking game. You talk it through and you have to BS your way out. Like
Oh,
there's
okay,
like
okay.
there's like turns and it tells you, all right, player one tell us something about this, and you may or may not know it if you don't have the right cards. Then you either just have to make it up or you're trying to hide. So I imagine one of those based on Name of the Rose, where maybe you're a Franciscan monk or maybe you're part of the Inquisition and you're trying to guess who's
I
doing
like
it.
this actually. I think this could work well.
That'd be fun.
Again,
Yeah.
this is like
Yeah.
a legit one. We're actually doing like these are legit today. It could actually happen. This is like,
Yeah.
it's Cards Against
Uh,
Humanity, but it's just, Cards Against the Rose.
mhm. It's intended for an incredibly small audience, but they will enjoy it.
I'm picturing like I don't know my brain's not working, but it's not self-flagellation.
No, that's the right word.
Mortification? Yes,
Flagellation.
Is it
Self-flagellation,
self-flagellation
still
is
the
self
right word.
self-farting?
Mm.
Isn't it's got to be another when you do this with the whip?
Yeah, that's
I thought that was
flagellation. Yeah,
self-flagellation.
Okay.
self-flagellation.
Self like
Not be
that.
self-flatulation.
Flatulation.
It is definitely the end of the season.
The joke was lost, but
What
it
other
came out
kind of
better.
flatulation could you
Right.
do than
Team
self-flagellation?
flagellation. You're in a small room and you're competing with the guys. What about you, Tom? Can you save this?
I can't. No, my idea was sort of handmade bookmarks. So like you can order a certain bookmark that would be, the Name of the Rose bookmark. So they could be really particular and cool and how you like. So it could help you avoid having to, unstick pages and get poisoned. But it would just be, like little things you can order, that type of thing.
Maybe a glove line?
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. That's it.
I think that's the high note for today.